Hello and welcome to OPA GCSE Sociology, and today we're going to be looking at what are those external factors influencing educational success. So just for your do now, in a few lines, write down what success at school will look like to you. That could be now, or that could be by the time you've left at the time of recording this in 2013. So just pause the video for a moment and then we'll discuss that after. Right, so I'm just going to discuss some of the things that were talked about in the class. So the main ones were things like obviously grades. They were getting through to the next hurdle, as it were, in terms of getting onto those BTEC, A-level courses or other college courses or apprenticeships. But what was really nice, some of the students as well said things outside of sort of the exam machine, as it were. So things like make sure they actually got through it, so not being excluded, or it might have been developing as a person, learning life skills, or it might have been making friends, or learning life lessons, as it were. So the point I'm trying to highlight here in the do now is there's no determined way of measuring how education is success. There's lots of ways, but there are obviously ways that sociologists and social scientists mainly look at, and they're the ones similar to what you associate with government. So we've got the main ones being obviously SATs in the lower years. So before you come to secondary school, we've also got the generic sort of GCSE results, BTEC results, those sort of things. Some schools do have school rankings and things like that, and you can actually look at local government stats and things like that. But yeah, this is generally what we look at, and sometimes, in fact, the way we look at GCSE results might be different to how the public looks. So what I mean by that is the teachers and schools will look at different things, maybe compared to what the public wants out of the GCSE results and parents. And generally speaking, we're going to be looking at internal, external factors of success. We're even going to be looking at things like how class, ethnicity, gender, and to some extent age, how they've impacted educational success. But when we talk about that success, that measurement is, generally speaking, these three things, especially those exam results. Right, so moving on. Just before we move into task one, just really keen to highlight the difference between internal and external success. So when we refer to internal, external influences, rather, if we're talking about internal influences, we're talking about all of those things that are happening inside of the school. External then must mean anything other than that, so anything outside of the school. So like we said, we're concentrating today on those external factors. And for task one, I want you just to think about, maybe note down, what are those external factors that you think influence your educational success, and just write them down. Use those images as a guide if you want to. So pause the video for the next couple of minutes, and then we'll come back to that and pick it up. Right, so if we go through those factors one by one now, and this is going to be the key bit of the lessons, going through them. There are others, but these are the key ones that we look at on the GCSE. Okay, so we're going to look at adults' attitudes, the job market, education policies, socialization, language, and material deprivation. And in fact, for task two, like I said, the main task one, task two, just write a summary of all of those points, and then maybe an example as well as we go along. Right, so how can socialization be an external influence? So the family, media, peers, etc., all are important in socializing children and passing on the norms, values, attitudes for society. This is most important in early childhood, and the main influence is usually the family. So the way that people process information, the actual motivation itself to learn and to work, behavior, whether it be communication skills and that analytical skills and all those skills associated with school are largely learned through observations or being taught it directly through all these different agents of socialization. Okay, so it was highlighting there that the family is the main one through primary socialization, but it can be your peers, the media, it can be a range of things, your religion, whatever. Okay, so an example I've given here, children learn the difference between right and wrong from their parents. This is passed on to reinforce this at school. So for example, in theory, your parents should have taught you that swearing is wrong, or at the bare minimum, swearing is wrong in specific contexts. So therefore, you should not be doing it at school, and therefore you'll be less likely to be given detentions and miss out on learning. So there's one factor. Just pause the video for 30 seconds, give you a moment just to write that down if you need to, any example. You can come up with your own. Okay, so the next one, material deprivation. Okay, so those who experience material deprivation may not have the best resources or facilities to get the best form of education. So children may be living in overcrowded homes and may struggle to revise because of that, don't have a learning space, as it were. It may be to do with nutrition. It may be the fact that because you haven't got the money to get good nutritional food, you come into class tired often. Maybe you don't even get food consistently at all. And it may be that that lack of nutrition means you're quite often unwell, or maybe you can't heat your home. There's a range of factors. It's not absolute poverty necessarily, but it may be that you're missing out on certain things. It might be you don't have access to a laptop or even basics like a book. Okay, there's loads of ways you can experience material deprivation. Okay, so again, I'm just going to pause it and then you can get this down with an example. Right, for the next one, so we've got adults' attitudes. And to be fair, this can also be within the school setting as well. So the interests and efforts that parents place in their children's education has been proven to be linked with academic achievement. This also applies to teachers. Ray found that teachers who negatively stereotyped children had low aspirations often resulted in a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, the teacher's element is generally speaking more inside of school. I guess you could argue the point that things like revision sessions or tutoring or setting of homework, but really in this context, adults' attitudes, we're talking about parents or guardians, because ultimately it's external. So parents may ensure that their children are completing their homework or providing them with tutors outside of school in order to help with academic achievement. Not every parent or guardian is necessarily engaged with their children's education. Not every parent or guardian necessarily it's not even a case of an intake and interest. They might actively be suspicious of education. It might be that they are very much of the opinion that you should be going and working straight away. Okay, some parents have different cultural perspectives. So again, I'm just going to pause that. You can get an example down here. Okay, so the next one, language. So children from different social classes or ethnic groups understand the same words, but in different ways. This can lead to students from certain groups starting with a disadvantage. So we're not just referring to it as EAL students, so English as an additional language students. It might be that where you're from a poorer background and a lower class, that you have essentially fallen behind in terms of reading age. So, for example, I go on quite often. Thurrock is not the poorest area, but it's not the richest. It has one of the highest records of, or rather one of the lowest records for literacy rate, so the average age amongst children. And that's exacerbated, made even worse when you compare the very poorest areas of Thurrock. So even within Thurrock, comparing those richer and poorer elements of Thurrock, you can notice the difference there. So the example I've got, a student may speak English as a second language, which may impact on understanding instructions or processing knowledge on a course. And that's true because the way your brain works, if it's not second nature, then you're having to learn it, which is taking more time to process, and it comes into cognitive load theory. So going into a bit more psychology and memories and things like that. So if you already have an understanding, a really sort of articulate way of reading and writing, then that's going to take pressure off you trying to word things and process things, and just you concentrating on absorbing the knowledge and the skills. And in fact, there's been lots of studies to show as well, middle class and upper class kids do better, partly as well because they understand the instructions. So it's the secondary concepts as well, not just the content. So again, I'm just going to pause that, give you a moment to write that down. Right, so next one, job market. So the feminization of the workplace has made jobs more competitive, as well as schools. Many theorists speculate whether this has led to a crisis of masculinity, where boys give up on school, believing jobs they used to get are now gone. And this is true in terms of this backlash. You know, people like Susan Faludi talking about this crisis in masculinity, this idea that where women now work, and it's almost culturally expected for women to work, that's just more competition. And many just become disenfranchised with work and education, thinking they haven't got a chance. So an example might be boys are no longer guaranteed the pick of jobs after college. They may believe that their time in school is best spent enjoying themselves and mucking around with friends. Right, so last one now, educational policies. So government policy changes have also led to certain students benefiting from the course compared to others. In recent years, the government has got rid of modular exams, and now students have to complete their exams at the end of the course. So let me explain that in a bit more detail and give you an example as a comparison. So I can't remember me doing the GC. This is actually an example of me doing the A level. But let's just say hypothetically it's GCSE because it's exactly the same. So I'm led to believe when I was doing my GCSEs, the way we done the modules, so similar to what is written down here. So you guys have two papers that you'll be studying. Paper 1, family and education. Paper 2, crime and deviance with social inequalities or social stratification. You'll do both of those papers on the current GCSE sociology at the end of 2 years. So you've got all of this knowledge that you have to remember, all these skills that you have to remember at the end of 2 years. Whereas compared to when I done the GCSE, it was broken down into manageable chunks. So hypothetically, I would have done in January, in that first year, the family module. Then I would have done education in the summer. So it would have meant by the time I'd reached year 11, I'd already done 50% of my GCSE. So it meant all I had to remember is crime and deviance for the January, and then in the summer, just that one module, social inequalities. So it's broken down a lot more. And since then, since the Gove sort of era, since the Conservative reform, since 2013, the grade boundaries have been a reflection of that, in fact. So not only was it the modulars system that made it, getting rid of that made it harder, but it also became a lot more like A-level to try and bridge the gap for GCSE to A-level students. And because loads of students were struggling, it meant that the grade boundaries were different. So to give you an example, for me to get what would be today a level 5, when I was doing the module, was you needed 60%, whereas now you need roughly about 43, 44, maybe even a bit lower. And in fact, 60% would get you on, you know, sort of a level 6, maybe even a little bit higher, who knows. And that's not a reflection of the cohort being better or weaker. It's just that the exam was different, so it's become a lot harder. So therefore, the grade boundaries today are a lot lower, and that's across the board, not just in sociology. So what I'm getting at here is policies, so government changes to how you do exams, to what content you go over, what skills you need to do, determine your results as well, and what success looks like. Okay. Right, so for task 3 now, I just want you to note down which factor you think is the most relatable to your educational experience. Okay, and then I'll go over and talk about what maybe 1 or 2 people said. So going over what some people said, and students were brutally honest. I'm not going to name any though. Some suggested things like the fact that they had to share a room, or they didn't have that extra room for revision, meant that they had to stay in school and do the work, or didn't do much at all, or very well. Some students noted that often, because their parents from different schedules and things like that, and the house was quite small, or homes were quite small rather, that they struggled to get to sleep. They was often woken up in the night, so we're often falling asleep or lethargic in class, or just not getting breakfast for whatever reason. Some noted as well, so some of them went the other way. So instead of it being a hindrance, some said, well, for English, maths and science, they were getting tutors and things like that for additional help. So it just shows you how this can be relatable. Okay, and how this could be presented. I'm not going to go over how it would be presented in a 12 marker. I'll go over it in a 3 or 4 marker for the time being. So identify and explain one way in which material deprivation could influence educational achievement. So we've gone over that, and in fact, you could replace material deprivation with any of these. And remember, you need to use that DIE approach to define it, say the importance of it, give an example, and then, yeah, feel free to bring it in and I'll give it a mark. And that concludes this video.